Namaste, everyone, and welcome. My name is Pranav Patel, and I'll be your host for tonight's webinar. So, tonight's event is brought to you by Hindu Yuva, the largest Hindu organization on campuses across North America, with over 100 university chapters and 35 high school chapters nationwide. Hindu Yuva, which stands for Youth for Unity, Virtues, and Action, is built around the four P's: practice, promote, preserve, and protect, helping young Hindus deepen their understanding of Dharma and carry it forward with confidence in their everyday lives. Through regular meetings, community events, and seva, or selfless service, Hindu Yuva chapters give back to the communities they're a part of, while building a strong sense of purpose and belonging among their members. Tonight marks the second of our four-part webinar series called Dharma in America, held in honor of America's 250th anniversary. Over the course of this summer, we're exploring four dimensions of Dharma: personal, family, community, and national, through conversations with well-known public figures about how they've navigated their own Dharma while building their lives here in America. Tonight's session focuses on family and relationships, the role that family and relationships play in shaping our values, identity, and sense of responsibility. Through this conversation, we'll reflect on what it means to show up with respect, patience, and honesty with our family and our relationships. We'll explore how Dharma can guide the way we handle expectations, conflict, support, commitment, and personal growth within families and close circles. Our goal tonight is to offer a modern and relatable view of relationship Dharma, helping all of us think more deeply about how meaningful relationships can become a foundation for strength, belonging, and purpose. And we have an incredible guest to help us do just that. Joining us tonight is Amit Ji Misra. Amit Ji has worked as an organizer and volunteer in the Hindu American community for over 30 years. He currently serves on the National Working Committee of Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh USA, the nation's largest Hindu organization. He also serves on the board of directors of Om Education Society of America, which is developing early childhood and elementary education programs for the Hindu community, and on the board of advisors of Seva International USA, the nation's largest Hindu faith-based charity. In his professional life, Amit has worked as an attorney for 30 years, specializing in labor and employment law, representing employers of all sizes, from closely held, owner-managed businesses to publicly traded Fortune 100 companies. In his personal life, Amit is married to Dr. Sangamitra Mishra, a professor at the Baylor College of Medicine, and they have three children. We're very excited to hear his story tonight. Guiding tonight's conversation is our moderator, Swati. Swati is originally from Novi, Michigan. She earned her Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science from Michigan State University and currently works as a software engineer at Amazon. During her time at Michigan State, she co-founded and served as president of the Hindu Yuva chapter. She currently serves as the Mukhya Shikshika of the Yuva Shakha in downtown Seattle. As a quick reminder to you all, we will be taking questions throughout the session. Be sure to ask them in the chat at any point, either on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll ask them towards the end. We look forward to your engagement. And with that, I'll hand it off to Swati to get us started.
Thank you very much, Pranav ji. Namaste, Amit ji. How are you doing today?
Namaste, doing fine.
Wonderful. Yeah. I know, obviously, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today for today's webinar series. As you know, this is being live streamed. So for folks out there watching the YouTube live, just a reminder that you can feel free to drop any questions that you have at any time in the chat, and we will be moderating those as well. But yeah, let's get started, Amici. Yeah,
Sure.
so honestly, I just want to get to first get to know you a little bit better. So both for me and for the audience out there. So before we dive into that topic, let's do that. So to start, we all have experiences, right, from our childhood that quietly shape, the way that we see the world. So I just want to understand, if you could tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your family's journey and how those early experiences in your life influence the person that you've become today.
Sure. I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and my parents were immigrants from Bharat, from northern India in Uttar Pradesh. My father and mother were in Lucknow before they came to the U.S., but their backgrounds were village and small town. And St. Louis at that time was obviously, like most of America, 90% white, no real Indian or Hindu community. And they had to obviously try to figure out how to raise children who would be successful in America without losing their Hindu identities. And, fortunately for us, our parents, I say us, I'm the youngest of four. I have three older sisters. Our parents were sure of who they were. I mean, in retrospect, I mean, my father was an active Sangha Karyakarta in Bharat before he came to the US. Uh, he came from, again, a small village in Uttar Pradesh and had already had to deal with assimilating in a sense, right? He had to assimilate from very rustic village culture to the urbane culture of Lucknow. And, my mother had to navigate what, frankly, a lot of American women were navigating in the early 70s, feminism, and how to deal with this idea that women could be in the workplace, could drive a car, could do all these things. So she's riding that journey along with, many of her peers who were already, in the US. And uh, they were able to, I think, with some success, bring us to where we are. I do think I know you're from the Midwest, but for us in that time, I think my parents moving from St. Louis to Houston was a reason why we've been successful in kind of maintaining our Hindu roots. Houston's a much more, even then in the late 70s, cosmopolitan city, much more diversity, larger Hindu community. And, that's kind of what brought us to where we are.
Got it. Right. So then listening to your story, I mean, even with your father and mother's story, it's clear that your family definitely played an important role in shaping your perspective. And as we grow older, many of us realize that the values that we learned at home continue to influence us long after we've left home or, moved out, whatever the sense. So looking back, right, what are some of the lessons your parents instilled in you that have stayed with you throughout your life? And as you've taken on different roles as a son, a husband, a father, an attorney, and a community leader, how has your understanding of Dharma evolved over the years?
So, in a nutshell, you have to do what needs to be done. And, my parents were, whether it was just things around the house, whether it was things outside the house in the community, if something needed to be done, they just put shoulder to the wheel and did it. There wasn't whining, there wasn't complaining. And I think the key lesson, though, is what needs to be done. Like it's very difficult to understand at all times what's the right thing to do. That's the whole complexity of dharma and the whole journey of understanding your svadharma and whatnot. And, I think my father had some interesting turning points in his professional life. He actually had a major lawsuit against his employer in the mid 80s based on what he perceived to be discrimination. And, he stood his ground and, things of that sort. Obviously, all the community work that my parents did led all of us to understand that we owed responsibilities, beyond the family. Comfort and convenience weren't the guiding words. It was do what needs to be done. And I think we are still doing that. We're probably much more comfortable than my parents ever were as far as financially or materially, but we still have the impetus to do what needs to be done.
Right, right. And I think that actually kind of perfectly leads us into today's theme. So, as a part of our webinar series, last week we explored personal dharma, and today we're widening that lens to family dharma. So, when you hear that phrase, family dharma, what does that mean to you, and why do you think it's important in today's world?
Well, it's always been important. It's not that it's only important today. And I think when we look at our own tradition, we see the importance that's been placed on it by certain concepts that developed within our tradition. So one, many of you all are familiar with the concept of the four stages of life, the Chatur Ashram that we have. And the second stage of life, the Grihastha Ashram, is translated into the householder stage of life. And, what does that mean? It means marriage, it means children, and it means pursuing artha and kama within the confines of this household that you're developing. And that's a necessary step in life. It's always been viewed as a necessary step in life. And I think another concept that marries well with that is this concept we have in our tradition of rina, or debts, and this idea of three debts we owe, one of which is the pitra rina, this debt to your ancestors. And the way you pay your debt to your ancestors is by having children. And so there's, for many, many millennia, we can say, in our tradition,
Mhm.
this emphasis on being a householder as a necessary part of life, having children as a necessary part of life, and fulfilling these aspects of the Chatur Purushart, the four goals of life, that artha, the material fulfillment, and kama, the uh, fulfillment of desires, that's done within the family. It's done within a household. It's not something you're doing pre-marriage, which of course is where the popular culture is now. And because we had this approach, I think we had a stress on family values. And obviously everyone uses that term and they talk about it, but I think it manifests in among Hindu families in a different way because it has a deeper resonance, for lack of a better way to explain it. And I think the aspect that makes it deeper is, as parents, what is it that we're giving our children?
Mhm.
And obviously we have to achieve, all those material things. They have to be fed, they have to be well clothed, they have to be in shelter, and they have to be educated. Those are all necessities, but what you're actually giving your child, no matter how poor you are, no matter how anything you are, is sanskara, is values. And if we're unable to raise our children with good sanskaras, then all the education and all the wealth and all the whatever we gave them really is for naught. And embedded within our tradition, then we have these three concepts of the grihastha ashram as a necessary stage of life, the pitra rina, having children as a debt we repay in this life, and then, of course, passing values on to our children, sanskara.
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful answer. And I think that's something that many young people, like including I, wrestle with today, right? Many of us are trying to build those careers, and pursue those personal goals, become financially independent, like you said, while also wanting to be present for our families. So sometimes it can kind of feel like those responsibilities are competing with one another, right? Trying to do these things, but also be there for our family and do that with our family. So in your opinion, how does family dharma help us think, sorry, let me start over. How does family dharma help us think through those kind of decisions and being able to balance all of that?
Well, I think that we, our families have to appreciate, and our children appreciate that you may be working, and so you may miss an event or you may uh, be late for a particular happening, and that's simply the children's expectations have to be managed in part. The spouse's expectations have to be managed, where both of you are working in a partnership and understand how you're going to divide those responsibilities, and it's agreed upon, it's not imposed. And I think that when we're able to have open communication of that sort, the spouses are understanding each other, the children are understanding the parents, then those expectations can be moderated and the disappointments can be reduced. Ultimately, we're all coming from the place of genuine affection, genuine understanding for, wanting the best for each other, and communication, open communication, making sure those expectations are well-founded and reasonable given the circumstances. That has to be something that's done, even with very young children and even between spouses, very early in the relationship.
Right, right. And you've spent more than, 3 decades working closely with, of course, Hindu youth and families, right? So you've had the opportunity to watch multiple, potentially multiple generations grow up here in America. When you look at those families that have successfully passed on those strong Hindu identities to their or values to their children, are there any common qualities or habits that stood out to you?
Well, I think we see many parents are always concerned about their children's peer group.
Hmm.
And I don't think that's an unnecessary concern. You obviously want your children to have, uh, whether it's classmates or neighbors or other friends around them who are positively reinforcing what you feel are good values. And sometimes that's achieved by having some number of Hindu friends and whatnot. And sometimes the non-Hindu friends are also very good reinforcers of positive values. Your children are filtering who they let into their lives. And if you've done a good job, then they're doing a good job filtering and they're bringing in people who are reinforcing the values that you have. But I think more important than the children's peer group is the family as a unit also has a peer group, right? The parents have their friends, they're spending time with families together. And what are those families bringing to the table as far as values and sensibility? And is that something that resonates with what you're trying to bring your family up with? So we need those positive role models and peer groups, not just for the children, but the families need those too.
Right. So I just to reiterate, so the qualities that you mentioned here are just being around people that kind of have similar-minded, like-minded qualities that you and your family are looking for.
Correct. I mean, ultimately, what are we looking for? We're looking for people who are honest, who are hardworking, who value education, who value time with family,
Mhm.
who understand that there is time for, play and fun, but play and fun doesn't involve activities that are potentially dangerous or harmful. Um, I had a good friend of mine who is still very close to me, and we used to talk about at the end of the day, it's the little things that are amusing, right? The time you spend with your friends and the jokes that you're cracking are generally about the most ridiculous little thing. It's not because there is some big party with this, that, and the other. That's not the driver of amusement. That's not even the driver of the fun memories. The fun memories are driven by spending time with each other and generally just doing nothing in particular. It's just the company of people and those are the types of values that we want, right? That it's a moderated and a moderate lifestyle. It's not an outrageous lifestyle. We're not looking for that. That's not keeping us within the confines of dharmic living.
Yeah, wonderful. And in your life, either growing up or even now in present day, um, when if I were to ask you who your role models were, even at the time, if you weren't looking for specific Hindu dharmas or values at the time, who comes to mind? That I guess has practiced these Hindu values and rituals that you were looking for.
Well, obviously, we all start at home, and I think, like any young person, there might have been moments where I clashed with my parents, and my mother was very mild-mannered, and with her, there generally wasn't much clash. My father had strong opinions and voiced them, and frankly, I think raised all of us to be very obstinate and loud.
Mhm.
And so, there were moments of disagreement and dispute for sure. And unfortunately, it's always in retrospect you realize how much you've absorbed from your parents. You don't realize that when they're with you. So I I don't think it's cliched for me to say that my parents were both role models for me. Uh, Past the parents is for with regard to say my involvement in Sangha or other Hindu related work.
Mhm.
I think growing up when I did and in Houston, where we just had this opportunity of pravas from all kinds of adhikaris from Bharat that at the time you don't even really understand who they are or what they're doing. And so again, it's in retrospect that the presence of people, just by way of example, we had a Swamiji, Swami Tilak. He was actually a Sangha Pracharak who then took sannyas. And he did pravas in the US multiple times in the late 70s and early 80s and would stay at our home. And, at the time, I kind of viewed him as almost like a grandfather type figure. And, later in life, I think I appreciated how much more he influenced me with regard to both my personal life and my involvement in Sangh related work. Obviously, there's a long list of Sangh Adhikaris who did pravas in the US in those days. Lakshman Rao Bhide ji, Shankar Rao Tattvadi ji, uh, even coming from Bharat, Seshadri ji. We even had, Sarsangachaliks from Bharat visiting the US, Raju Bhaiya and Sudarshan ji later in the 2000s. So, all of these personalities, you interact with them, and the interactions at the time are not particularly profound. It's not like you're discussing deep philosophy or something, but the sum total of it is smoothing out the rough edges on your personality and make you who you are.
Right, right. And then, so then growing up around these big families and of your own, I think you mentioned that you have three young children. So what are some, potential rituals that you guys follow in your home to create that closeness in that family and to preserve Dharma?
So my wife's family is originally from Bengal. I think I mentioned my parents were from Uttar Pradesh. So when we first married, we had to kind of agree on a family calendar and decide what we were going to observe and what to celebrate and whatnot. So just by way of example, in Bengali custom, the annaprashna, the first feeding for a newborn at 6 months, is done in a very grand way. You invite all your friends and family, neighbors, and you have the ceremony of actually feeding, and it's done in a really grand way. And then in Uttar Pradesh, my parents, the mundan, the head shaving of the young child is done in a big way. So let's just do both of them, right? Like, why are we going to compromise and only do one and not the other? And so, with all three children, we've done all the sanskara that we knew to do when it involved bringing in the pujari. We did it with the full vidhi. If it involved just the kind of family customs, then of course we did it just that way. Both our boys have had their upanayanam, for example. So, we've done stepwise those types of rituals and built a uh, definitely family tradition around it, right? Like we will do our small home pujas for the different festivals, beginning with Ram Navami and Hanuman Jayanti, and then working your way through the calendar all the way to uh, Saraswati Puja and Shivratri. So we observe all of these festivals within the family, and I presume it's made some imprint, on the children. I mean, they're just the two older ones are reaching adulthood, and our youngest is still in middle school. So we still have some time to go to with him to make sure he also learns these traditions.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, Amit Ji, did you mention you did your undergraduate studies in the US?
I mean, I'm born and raised in the States.
Okay, born
I
and raised. Okay.
High school
Right.
is Houston, college was at George Washington in DC, law school was back here in Texas, and I've been in Texas ever since.
Got it, got it. So maybe throughout conversations within your family, right? What kind of differences did you see in your upbringing versus the way, potentially your wife and your kids have been raised? What traditions did you notice were different? Anything that had to have been evolved, for because you guys are in the US and you're raising a family in the
Not
US?
really. I mean, I think just it's a little side story in agreeing on that family calendar. In the Bengali culture, the Kali Puja is a huge festival,
Mhm.
and Kali Puja is celebrated at the same time as Diwali. And I explained to my wife, I don't know how to do Kali Puja. I think doing Kali Puja and kind of doing it wrong. Definitely don't want to do that. And so we'll do Lakshmi Puja at home, and then we'll go to the mandir for Kali Puja because then that Purohit is doing it right. We don't have to do it at home. So, little compromises like that we've worked out. But I think the biggest difference between our upbringing and our children is actually had nothing to do with our tradition.
Mhm.
Is that my wife, who's also, I mean, she's a native Houstonian, and when you look at how we grew up in a suburb of Houston that was still overwhelmingly white, I think we felt a much greater pressure to assimilate to a majority white Texan culture.
Mhm. Mhm.
And our children growing up in the same suburb, which is now only 25% white, they don't feel that at all.
Mhm.
So that's been a huge change just within, our own family dynamic, looking at my wife and I, our childhoods and looking at our children. So my children don't listen to country music at all. They don't feel an urge to, whereas I think my wife and I both, picked up some country songs from the 80s or 90s. That's when we grew up and
Yeah, yeah.
the friends were listening to it or whatnot. So, that's a big difference. But as far as what we're doing with regard to our Hindu culture, I don't really see that there's much difference at all.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and I think that kind of brings back to the point that, you mentioned being around community, being around those role models, those peer groups that you mentioned, just being around community to reinforce your family is what's required. And as Hindu families become more established in America, there's often a conversation about what traditions we should preserve and what adaptations are natural over time, which we touched upon. So, from your perspective, how should families think about preserving our traditions while raising children in an American context?
Well, you have to be proactive because there's no osmosis here. We're not living in a place that's majority Hindu that you step outside and it's holy, and so you step outside and people are throwing water at you. It just won't happen, right? Either you make an effort to celebrate Holi on your own or with other Hindus in the community, or it's not going to be celebrated at all. And that being proactive, you have to decide what you want and what you're comfortable with and make the effort, right? And if you are lacking some information or knowledge about it, then you have to make that effort to learn about it. So if there's a particular holiday that you want to celebrate, but you don't know how to celebrate or something like that, then go figure it out. But at the end of the day, you have to be proactive. And if you're not, if you think somehow it's just going to be absorbed, again, osmosis, that doesn't happen here. It may happen back in Bharat because it's still a majority Hindu country and, mohalla mein ye ho raha hai, wo ho raha hai, so you'll just get it. And that doesn't happen here. So if you're not proactive and making steps and deciding this is what we're doing, we're going to observe this, we're going to observe this, it's too much to do this. We're not going to do that. I mean, I suppose you may make that decision too, but you have to be proactive and decide things.
Being proactive and putting in that work, to your
Correct.
point. So, yeah, wonderful. Makes sense.
I mean, just by another example, my wife, because of her own background, is a trained Hindustani classical vocalist because my mother-in-law was, and my mother-in-law, taught music before she passed away, and my wife learned all those lessons. And our children have, learned music, classical Hindustani music from her as well. And my wife's interest has led her to have a monthly kirtan group. So, once a month, families get together and she'll lead the singing, but others will also join in and whatnot. And so, that's something she decided to do, and so we're doing it, right? I mean, if it's just so I'm just going to sing in my car and not really practice it with people, then kind of what's the point of that? So being proactive, taking those steps, even taking those risks. I mean, you can invite people to a kirtan and no one shows up. So, there's some element of risk involved, but you do it anyway. And I mean, it's going on for years. I mean, our kids have grown up with that and they're very used to it. And we have, a circle of friends and family who've been involved in that too. And I'm hoping their children would also feel the same way that they did get something out of that.
Right. And it's also just a sense of community that you're building out there. It's not just your family that you're a part of, it's this
Correct.
greater sense of community, and that's what makes it family, right?
Correct.
Wonderful. Yeah. So I'd actually like to shift gears a little bit here and actually talk
Sure.
about your career as well and how that all fits in as well.
Okay.
So you've spent nearly, I want to say 25 to 30 plus years
30
practicing
years
labor.
now.
30 years now? Yeah, wonderful. Of practicing labor and employment law. So representing everyone from small families to, I think you said, businesses to Fortune 10 companies, right? So that's a field that often involves very difficult conversations and competing interests. So how have the values you learned growing up and your understanding of Dharma influenced the way that you've approached your work as an attorney?
Well, as an attorney, you have a fiduciary and ethical obligation to represent your client zealously. And it's in the disciplinary rules of ethics that all attorneys have here in the US. I think coming from a Hindu perspective, you obviously embrace it and you view it from the sense of, the client comes first. It's my dharma to serve this client. And, I'll give you an example from earlier in my career. There was a company that I was representing and through various employment matters, and there was an HR manager in that company that I would speak with regularly to, address different things. And, one day the CEO of the company calls me up
Mhm.
to tell me that he needs to fire the HR manager because the HR manager's actually developed some kind of drinking problem and it's affecting his performance and this and that. And, for several months, my I identified the HR manager with the client, right? This was the only person I talked to. No one else ever had approached me about any issues at that company.
Mhm.
And then you realize, well, the client is this company, right? It's this entity. It's not this individual HR manager. And now it's my job to advise the company on how to fire him.
Right.
So, that's something that from not to make my sound so grand, but it's the Bhishma Pitama is he's dedicated to the throne of Hastinapur no matter who sits in it, right? That's the obligation he's taken. And so, as an attorney, your obligation is to the client. If the client's a corporate entity, it's that entity who's the client. It's not any one individual in it. So, that's something that I think has my Hindu background has informed how I approach it. I don't think it's that I'm more zealous as an attorney than a non-Hindu attorney. It's just I think the way I approach it is coming from uh, a dharmic perspective.
And even with such a demanding legal career, right? Such a crazy story, like you just mentioned, you've continued investing your time in actually Hindu education through HSS and now Om School. And that tells me this work is deeply personal to you. So what role do you hope institutions like Om School play in helping Hindu Americans develop not just knowledge of Hinduism, but also just a confident sense of identity and purpose?
So I think as a community, the goal should be that we have some baseline of minimum knowledge from Hindu tradition that all Hindu Americans have. And it should be there's some enough to know. I mean, you're knowing enough to be a good Hindu. I don't know what that quantity is necessarily. I don't know if any one of us does, but the effort is to make sure there's enough information for you to be a good Hindu. And alongside that, there's enough knowledge of practice so you can do enough to be a good Hindu. I think one of the disconnects we have is, and I see this definitely among, as I am an older second generation Hindu American, most of my peer group and folks that are even younger than me may not have grown up in a household where there was a lot of doing. Uh, and doing to be Hindu may involve simply lighting a diya, lighting an agarbatti, saying one or two shlokas, singing an arati. No one's saying you have to do, 15 hours of puja a day or something like that. But there has to be some doing, or all the ideas in your head about dharma, karma, atma, moksha, like where does that go?
Mhm.
Right? It has to have some manifestation. So you have to know enough and you have to do enough to be Hindu. And I don't whatever that baseline is of knowing enough and doing enough, the goal is to get our whole community there. And obviously there are unlimited number of Hindu organizations that are all doing their effort to make sure that young Hindus and even, as adults, we know enough and do enough. And with all due respect to everybody, we're missing the boat somewhere because, I mean, you mentioned earlier, I've seen kind of multiple age groups come into adulthood and whatnot.
Mhm.
And I'm not entirely sure how we would measure the level of success we've had, because I do think there's a large number of adult Hindus in this country who are second generation, frankly, who are first generation, because there are all kinds of changes in culture back in Bharat as well. So we have a substantial number of first generation and second generation adult Hindus in the United States who, at least in my opinion, don't have the baseline minimum of knowing enough and definitely are not doing the baseline minimum of doing enough. And I do think that is potentially uh, devastating for our community.
Got it. Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on this is that from prior questions is that it's not just us that needs to put in the work in order to make sure that this is continuously happening, where we are making sure that we as personal individuals, as well as, the people that we're responsible for in our family and our friends are also um, acting and instilling these Hindu values and traditions. And so before we move on to the whole America 250 portion of, understanding why, Hindu Dharma is so important, especially in America, especially after so many years. I do want to quickly remind all the viewers actually on the YouTube link, the YouTube live stream, to also drop in any questions that you guys have throughout. I am monitoring those questions, and in just a few moments, we will be opening it up to questions from the audience. So yeah, back to the questions here, Amit Ji. So then, again, this entire webinar series, right, is a part of Hindu Yuva's America's 250 years initiative. So it asks us to reflect on both our country's history and the future we're helping shape together. So as you think about America's next chapter, whatever that might look like, what unique role do you believe Hindu Americans now play in shaping the future of this country?
Well, one role is actually somewhat difficult for us because through no effort on our part, a number of Hindu ideas and Hindu values have percolated into American culture. Uh, there, by the way, Philip Goldberg is a writer who's written a book, The American Veda, who's done a wonderful job kind of compiling this survey of where and how different Hindu ideas have come into overall American culture from, Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson through Swami Vivekananda all the way to the present. And
Mhm.
so without any effort by, predominantly immigrant-based Hindu American community, Hindu ideas are part of America and part of American culture. How can we become stewards of that? I think that's a challenge we have. And I think it's a challenge that the immigrant generation uh, cannot and frankly should not have to meet. They have other more pertinent, more direct issues for them. I think this is uniquely a challenge for second and later generation Hindus. How do we become stewards of the Hindu ideas that are already in the American culture? So when Americans talk about karma or chakras or any one of these ideas that are
Mhm.
now in the American mainstream and it's disconnected from its Hinduness, it may even be misinterpreted, or even frankly, if it's being interpreted correctly, that we make sure it's moored to its Hindu roots. That's something that only we're going to do because the mainstream American culture doesn't see that as an obligation. It's an obligation that we have. So I think that's something as our community becomes less immigrant and more US born, will automatically become an obligation that we have, right? To become stewards of Hindu culture as it exists in America, including these strands of culture that we didn't even bring in. They've simply been brought here by people in the past.
Right, right. So then building on that thought, if we fast forward another, let's say 25 to 30 years from now, what do you hope the Hindu American community has become by then? And not only within our own community, right? But we live in a country where it's not just Hindu Americans here.
Right.
So not only within our community, but in the broader American story, what do you hope to see the Hindu American community become?
So one kind of school of history, the way they view American history is progress, that we've gone from promises of equality to slowly working our way to equality.
Mhm.
And I think in that never-ending progress where we attacked racial bigotry, we've attacked sexism, and we've brought all types of people into this broader fold of Americans who are equal before the law before the eyes of God, whoever it is. I think the next place for us to go that directly impacts us is the idea that religious supremacism is bigotry. So, we live in a country that's majority Christian still, with a fast-growing Muslim minority. And the Christian tradition and the Muslim tradition are very much tied to religious exclusivity, right? Our way is the only way. And kind of the two-sided coin of religious exclusivity, one side's exclusivity, but the other side ends up being in a supremacism, right? The need to convert me or the need to change me, they may feel it's a religious obligation, but when it comes to me being changed, it's an act of violence. It's a form of bigotry. And bringing home this idea that religious exclusivity, religious supremacism are forms of bigotry, and they're as ugly as any other form of bigotry that we've worked to eliminate in this society. I think that's something that the Hindu American minority in this country, because we come from a tradition of religious pluralism, it's a obligation we have to rid this country of the idea that religious exclusivity is somehow acceptable and somehow even legally protected, under the First Amendment, freedom of religion. I can believe that you're going to hell. I can believe that you're damned. I can believe that you're an infidel. I mean, you may be able to believe that, but you shouldn't have the right to challenge me on it. And your ideas of hate, from my perspective, shouldn't be given credence. So I think that's a huge challenge we have as a Hindu American community. I think another role we have to play, and I alluded earlier to changes culturally even happening back in Bharat.
Mhm.
If I look at a billion plus global Hindu community, from a per capita GDP perspective, the richest Hindus on the planet are Hindu Americans. And from a global perspective, we have a role to play of showing that it doesn't matter how wealthy you can still be an observant, proactive Hindu.
Mhm.
That acquiring material wealth doesn't mean that you lose your Hinduness. I think there's an aspect of economic development and economic growth happening in Bharat, especially in urban areas where, especially young people, they view the acquiring the good life means rejecting Hindu values. And we have a unique way to play the being role models to a global Hindu community that you can be a per capita GDP of X thousand, whatever it is, and you can have all the gadgets and all the accoutrements of first world living, and that doesn't mean that you reject and throw away Hindu tradition. To the contrary, we would attribute, at least some of us would, our success to the fact that we are Hindu.
Mhm.
And we need to be able to say that in a way that in this globally connected world, right? That our brethren, whether they're in Bharat or Nepal or any other country that's still in a developing country stage, they can say, look, Hindus can do well, and being Hindu doesn't mean that you are poor, backward, obscure, whatever other negative attribute you would give to it.
I think that's a wonderful and strong message there, Amit Ji. So being able to just coexist as a Hindu, not be, I guess, greatly challenged, and being able to, you know, I guess challenge the negative comments and questions that we receive, and being able to just walk through that is very, very important moving forward. And I think that's a challenge that will not be solved overnight, right? It's going to take many, many years.
Yes.
But we just have to stand strong and put our foot down, right? Wonderful. Actually, yeah, now I'd like to actually open it up to the audience. So we've been getting a couple questions from our YouTube live. So I'm just gonna rapid fire ask some questions and feel free to answer how you'd like.
Sure.
So first question we have here is, how should students navigate roommates, friends, or peers whose values differ significantly from theirs?
So I'll share a story with you that my father shared with me. And I have no idea if it's a true story, but I think it's a great story,
Okay.
right? I can say it in Hindi, but I'll translate it in English just for those that don't speak Hindi.
Sure.
When I was your age, I had three very close friends. one drank, one smoked, one gambled, and I didn't do any of those things. And you don't have to be the moral arbiter for your friend's life, right?
Mhm.
If there's something in your friend that you value, their company, their companionship, their humor, whatever it is, that's what you take.
Right.
And if there are aspects to their life that you yourself would never partake in, that doesn't mean that you have to give up the friendship, right? I mean, you can, whether it's a roommate, whether it's a friend, however it is, I think navigating that, you start with who am I, right? And what am I doing? What am I not going to do? Where do I draw my lines? And if you have that confidence and comfort in understanding your lines and what it is that you are, then you can interact with anyone in the world and it shouldn't have a problem, shouldn't have any negative impacts on you.
Yeah, makes sense. The second question that we have here from the audience, kind of along the lines, but is are prenups dharmic? Can they coexist with the spiritual commitment of marriage, or do they undermine trust from the start?
So I don't want to give legal advice. And I don't want to, I see the points that are being raised in the question. I'll put it that. I mean, I can appreciate that. Um, the world is what it is. Even in traditional Hindu life, in certain communities, something similar to what we would call divorce happened, right? We've got historical records showing in certain communities in Hindu history, uh, if a person was unfaithful in the marriage or something of that sort and they separated, it was possible to separate, it was possible to remarry. Like this happened, right?
Hmm.
I mean, it's just, you can't have so many people over so many years and not have these things happen. If you're a practical person and you've actually made this much money doing whatever it is that you do, you own SpaceX stock and you're suddenly a billionaire and you need to sign a prenup, I'm not going to tell you not to.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, we would want that marriage to last forever. And frankly, if it does, then the prenup's meaningless, right? I mean, it only comes into play if there's a divorce. So uh, I think it's difficult to try to compartmentalize that this is dharmic and this isn't dharmic. I think the whole concept of dharma is that it is a facts and circumstances approach to what is right and what is wrong. And it's very nuanced. It's something that takes lifetimes to develop a deep understanding of. And I'm not going to try to compartmentalize, right, a legal decision as being dharmic or non-dharmic. I'll
Right.
simply say, if you've actually made that much money and you feel you need to protect it, you take your legal steps.
Makes sense. Yeah, wonderful answer. And, apart from marriages and relationships, I think another important aspect in our lives that has, I think, recently come up is technology and social media. So, as technology and social media increasingly affect our relationships, what are some ways families can intentionally cultivate, more meaningful relationships rooted in Dharma?
It's all about spending time with each other. Um, I'll give you an example. It's maybe apples and oranges, but during COVID time, and you're sitting at home, and we ended up downloading and playing some ridiculous games, with our immediate family, and then joined in with some extended family, and it's perfectly fine to use technology as a way to bring people together, and there may be ways to do that, depending on who you are and what your interests are and whatnot. So we don't need to be allergic to technology and refuse to use it. I think it's important to spend time with each other. Sometimes that could involve using technology. Sometimes it means throwing the technology out and doing something else. But at the end of the day, it's all about spending time with each other and it's quality time. It's not just I'm driving you to practice, I'm driving you to school. That also, let me take that back. That can also be quality time, right? I mean, how do you spend that 30-minute in the drive in the car? I mean, are you chatting about this, that, and the other, or is everyone radio silent, or you're just focusing on driving and your kid's on the phone? I mean, however you spend that time together, if there's actual interaction, then I think you've overcome all the issues and technology is going to be what it is.
Yeah, so just being able to be present with those around you, and
Correct.
still having
Correct.
that open communication is very important, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then I think a little kind of a segue, but more talking about communication still. This one's more about language. So, what role does language play in raising children in like a multilingual household like yours? Beyond communication, how does it shape your children's, identity, culture, and values?
Well, the contemporary Indian American culture is a reflection of contemporary Indian culture, and India, of course, is very much buys into regional linguistic identity. I mean, that defines who you are. I am Gujarati, I am Tamilian, I am this. That's the way people think. And it bleeds into Indian American culture. And so all of us are impacted by that. And if you have a household where, again, my family's originally from Uttar Pradesh, my wife's family's originally from Bengal, what does that make us? What does that make our kids? Um, with our older son, we were very good in raising him bilingual Hindi Bangla. He didn't even speak English till he went to school at age 3. And then what happened is the same thing happened in me in my childhood. As the second child comes in the family, the two children speak to each other in English. And then whatever you try to instill in them is basically lost. And by the time the third child shows up, they're just all conversing in English. I mean, even me and my sisters, all four of us, if we ever get together, the whole conversation's in English, even
Hmm.
though we all speak Hindi.
Okay.
So you want to try to maintain some knowledge of the language, and maybe it ends up being only through songs, bhajans, and that type of thing, because generally we're not singing, English bhajans and whatnot. So I think if you want to preserve some sense of the language, obviously the ideal case is that you actually converse in it all the time, right? At home, and you don't use English at home. What ends up happening is the vocabularies are not developed, they erode, and English ends up being the filler word. In the whole sentence, it's never exclusively in Telugu or exclusively in Kannada. It's always half-half.
Right.
Or the parents are talking in the so-called mother tongue and the children are responding in English. That's also a very common way we end up seeing it. So the children understand it perfectly, but they won't form a sentence with it.
Right. Right.
And that's just what we observe. And you try your best. I mean, at the end of the day, we live in an English language country. Our financial and material success depends entirely on how well we speak English, and we're not going to inhibit or hinder that, right? We're going to obviously encourage that. So we make the efforts we can. If you're able to spend months on end over summer in a hometown back in Bharat and speak that language with the extended family and whatnot, that's wonderful. Some folks can't do that. Definitely as second generation, there's no one for us really to go back to, for our children to go back to in Bharat. And so they know some Hindi, they know some Bangla, but they're not writing and reading. I mean, they actually can read Devanagari, and I think the pronunciation is great, but they're not uh, conversing on high level topics in those languages. But
Right.
I don't think it limits their Hinduness, right? I mean, I think if
Great.
just by way of example, we know we have a very active Hindu community in the Caribbean, for example, that uh, is largely not Indic language speaking because they're several generations removed from Bharat and they've maintained their Hinduness. So it's obviously doable. It's just a question, are we willing to do it?
Right. Right. And I think language specifically shouldn't be the only factor, the only way to continue to, be a Hindu. That shouldn't be the case. And
I
there's
mean, unfortunately, we see in communities where there are large populations, I mean, not to pick on anyone, but in the Malayali speaking community, there's a large Christian community. They don't feel they're less Christian because they speak Malayalam, right? I
right.
mean, there's no real one-to-one correspondence between the Indian language and the religious identity. So we need to just be proactively Hindu. Language is a component, but it's not the component.
Yep. Great answer. I completely agree. Yeah. And then for the newer, I mean, I guess younger generations that, are starting to build their family, moving out of their home slowly, things like that. I think one natural aspect is, to move out of your home, go buy a home somewhere new in a new city, something like that. that's just the way of life, right? One question that we got in the audience chat is, many cities don't have accessible resources for Hindus. And I know we mentioned just now that one specific thing shouldn't define if we are Hindu or not. But, in certain cities, there just aren't accessible resources for Hindus, like temples, small, just there being like a small Hindu population to begin with.
Right.
What suggestions would you have for families in those type of areas, in those type of cities? What have you seen work?
So I think we have, even in, not to pick on the Midwest, but even in some smaller Midwestern cities, in the last several years, just because of increased immigration, there's still a critical mass. What is that critical mass? Is it 20 families, 50 families? Like, when do you reach enough Hindus where you can have some organized activity that creates some positively reinforcing peer group? So I think even in a smaller city, there may be a critical mass if you're the one who's proactively organizing it. I mean, it may be a little bit of a burden you have to take, but maybe you find the 5 or 10 other Hindu families that exist there and try to bring them together with some frequency, just so there's at least something going on. Obviously, there's no shortage of resources on internet to educate yourself and to try to use that information to educate your children. Obviously, you can visit home and spend time with the extended family and wherever the parents are still living in the U.S. So, I mean, there are things to do. I don't think it's we just kind of give up hope and, not try anything. So I think those are all steps we can take. And sometimes being proactive means being the one who actually organizes,
Mhm.
right? You may not be able to take advantage of some prior person who built the mandir. Maybe you're the one who's stuck building it, if that's what you want to do. So.
Right. And I think that that's a very extreme example of, just being the one to build a temple, but there are many other smaller ways to,
Of course. I mean, I
yeah,
think again, just bringing 5 families together
yeah.
who all look like you, and just to give the children that sense of comfort that, we're not alone in this world and whatnot. I mean, I think that those are easy steps to take.
And one small example that you mentioned earlier is that just comes to mind, just to reiterate, is like how you and your wife host bhajan nights
It's
almost
it's
every month.
entirely her baby, and I'm the sound guy. That's my only job there. But yeah, she has a monthly kirtan group, and it's definitely something that she just put together on her own, and it's grown to, I think there's like, they don't all show up to every kirtan, but I think her list is like 60 or 70 families now. So,
Wow. Oh,
you know,
so something so small turned into something so
yeah,
big. So
yeah,
such a
definitely.
meaningful way. Oh, how nice. Yeah. Cool. I think, yeah, that's pretty much all that we have coming in from our audience questions. So just to wrap up, I just have one final question for you, Amit Ji. So you've shared so many thoughtful ideas today about, responsibility, family, the future of our community. So as we wrap up, I'd love to leave everyone with one final takeaway here. So if every young Hindu watching today remembered just one lesson about, living their family dharma, what would you hope that lesson would be? What would you like to share with us?
Get married early and have a lot of babies,
Please
right?
expand on that.
It's an ongoing, it's a concern that's now, I think a lot of policymakers in all over the world are concerned about fertility rates of all things, that fewer people are getting married, fewer people are having children, population is declining. The trends at least are showing that. And there's no reason for us to, as a community, to jump onto that bandwagon. I think, you talked about coming out of school and people moving and finding their jobs and this and that.
Mhm.
There's no reason those things can't happen with a life partner. You don't have to be 30 and settled in your job to get married. You can do it the exact opposite, get married and then get settled in your job. When I was, I'm 30 years out of law school now, but when I was in law school, and I also did another graduate degree, I mean, it was normal to be married in graduate school. No one thought it was unusual, right? I mean, it's just the way life worked. I mean, you're in your mid 20s, you get married. And if that means that one partner's in school and the other one is in a job, then that's what happens. And there's no reason to put life on hold. And in my opinion, not getting married is putting life on hold. If you're so worried about your education and career that you don't get married, you're putting your life on hold, because your education and your career It's part of life. It can't define you. Very few of us are going to have lives that are, you're the Einstein of your era or your generation, right? I mean, for that one or two people that want to be so tunneled into their careers that nothing else matters, that's wonderful for them. But for 99% of the rest of us, you're just a normal, regular person. There's nothing special or unique about your skill set, about your career path, that you need to sacrifice everything else just to
Mhm.
pursue it. And we've really, and it's not unique to I mean, this is again a global phenomenon right now. It's definitely happening all across American society, all ethnicities, all religious groups, where young people are just so caught up in whatever that family formation's not happening. And why are we doing it at age 30 or 35 instead of 25? I just don't understand it. So that's my one lesson for everyone to take away is get married early and then have a lot of kids. This whole, we see definitely in the immigrant generation that is right now in their 30s and 40s here in the US, many of them have only one child. Like, what are you doing? You're living in the most abundant country on earth. Have more than one kid. Have more than two kids. Like, go buy a minivan and have four kids. Who's stopping you, right? Um, have a big family and get married early. That's the message to take home.
Wonderful. Yeah, I definitely was not expecting that as a response, but I think it totally makes sense and really ties in our topic here about family dharma, right? Is to raise a family, build that family,
Yes, definitely.
especially in your young years. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amit Ji. Actually, that's all the questions that I have. And thank you so much for the audience out there, watching from our YouTube live with all of your questions as well. Um, yeah, thank you for your time. And Pranav, I will hand it back to you for closing.
Thank you so much, Swati and Namiji, for such a thoughtful and meaningful conversation tonight. I think hearing how Dharma has shaped the way you've navigated your family, your relationships, your life, your commitment over the years gives us a lot to reflect on in our own journeys in our own lives. And definitely a lot of valuable advice for the youth, for all the Hindu youth, things that I'll remember, I'll take care as well. And so thank you for that. And to everyone who joined us live tonight, thank you once again for being here and for being a part of this conversation. Again, this is the second of our four-part Dharma in America series, and we have two more Sundays to go. So we hope you'll join us again as we continue exploring community and national Dharma. So again, on behalf of Hindu Yuva, thank you again to our speaker, our